Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. You know, sometimes you just got to treat yourself, and this week I finally caved and checked out that new boba place down the street.
Oh.
The one everyone's been raving about. Taro bubble tea, extra boba the works.
Rice.
Totally worth the traffic jam to get there.
I have to admit, I'm more of a classic coffee person myself.
Well, listener, you know, we're not just here for the beverage reviews.
Yeah.
You wanted us to dive deep into this whole authoritarianism versus democracy thing. That debate that's been heating up everywhere you look lately.
For sure.
And honestly, it's been on my mind too. It feels like the whole world is picking sides these days, and it's kind of freaking me out.
Yeah, it's a big question with global implications, no doubt. It's sparking some pretty intense discussions everywhere.
So, okay, before we get into all the nitty-gritty details, let's make sure we're all on the same page. Like, what exactly are we even talking about when we say authoritarianism?
Well, think of it this way. In an authoritarian system, the government has a tight grip on pretty much everything.
Everything.
The economy, the media, what people can say and do, even what they're allowed to believe. Individual freedoms are limited, and dissent is often met with swift and harsh consequences.
So, like, if you're living under an authoritarian government, you can't just go around criticizing the government or protesting in the streets without getting into serious trouble.
Exactly. There's a very low tolerance for anything that challenges the authority of those in power. And often there's a culture of fear and self-censorship where people are afraid to speak their minds or even think certain thoughts for fear of being reported or punished.
That sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, we've got some pretty compelling case studies.
Okay.
Take China's social credit system, for example. It's a system where citizens are given a score based on their behavior, and that score can affect everything from their access to loans to their ability to travel.
It's a way for the government to monitor and control people's behavior, incentivizing them to conform to certain norms and discouraging any dissent.
Big Brother vibes, not gonna lie.
It raises some serious concerns about privacy and freedom of expression for sure, and it's a stark contrast to how things work in a democratic system.
Right. Democracy, land of the free, home of the brave, all that good stuff. So let's break that down. What makes a system democratic?
At its core, democracy is about giving power to the people. It's a system where citizens have the right to choose their leaders through free and fair elections, to express their opinions without fear of reprisal, and to hold those in power accountable.
So basically, you get to have a say in how your country is run, and if you don't like how things are going, you can vote the bums outright. Pretty much. It's about giving citizens a voice and ensuring that their rights are protected. And one of the key mechanisms for achieving that is something called checks and balances.
Okay, I've heard that term thrown around a lot, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure what it means. Can you break it down for us?
Sure. Checks and balances refer to the way power is distributed within a democratic system. The idea is to prevent any one person or branch of government from becoming too powerful and potentially abusing that power.
So it's like a system of safeguards to make sure no one goes rogue and starts ruling like a dictator.
Exactly. For example, in the U.S., you have the president, Congress, and the Supreme Court, each with their own distinct powers and responsibilities. And they're designed to keep each other in check.
Okay.
Congress can pass laws, but the president can veto them. The president can nominate judges, but the Senate has to confirm them. And the Supreme Court can strike down laws that it deems unconstitutional.
So it's like a constant tug of war between different parts of the government, making sure no one gets too much control.
That's a great way to put it. It's not always pretty or efficient, but it's designed to protect individual freedoms and prevent tyranny.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal of democracy here. But let's be real. It's not all sunshine and roses, is it? I mean, we've all seen how messy and divided things can get, especially these days.
You're absolutely right. Democracy is messy. It's loud. It's often frustrating. But that's kind of the point. It's about allowing for different viewpoints, for debate, for dissent, even when it's uncomfortable. And ultimately, it's about finding a way to govern ourselves peacefully, even when we disagree.
I'm starting to get a better grasp on these two systems, but here's what's been bugging me lately. It feels like the lines between authoritarianism and democracy are getting blurry these days. We've got sources talking about countries like Hungary and Poland, which are technically democracies, but they seem to be sliding towards more authoritarian tendencies. And then there's China, which is becoming increasingly powerful on the world stage. It's like the whole global balance of power is shifting, and it's kind of freaking me out.
There's definitely a sense that the global landscape is in flux, and it's raising concerns about the future of democracy. The rise of populism, the spread of misinformation, the increasing influence of authoritarian regimes, All of these factors are contributing to a sense of unease and uncertainty.
So it's not just a simple good versus evil kind of thing anymore.
Not at all. It's a complex and constantly evolving situation, and it requires us to think critically about the challenges facing both authoritarian and democratic systems.
Okay, this is getting deep. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I got to ask, why should we even care about all this? I mean, we're just two people sipping our drinks and chatting about world events. Does it really make a difference what kind of system some far-off country has?
It might seem that way, but the reality is that these debates have very real consequences for people's lives.
Okay.
Even if we don't see them directly. The rise of authoritarianism, the erosion of democratic values, the spread of misinformation, these are all issues that affect us all, whether we realize it or not.
All right, I see your point. But still, it feels like we're just scratching the surface here. What about the day-to-day experience of living under these different systems? What's it actually like for people on the ground?
That's a crucial question, and it's one we're going to explore in more depth in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds intense. I'm ready for another sip of my boba. How about you, listener? Hang in there with us, because things are about to get real. But I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. All right, are you ready to hear from some people who have actually experienced life under authoritarian and democratic systems?
Hit me with it. These firsthand accounts are what really bring this whole debate to life for me. I want to hear what it's like for people on the ground dealing with the day-to-day realities of these systems.
Well, one of the most striking things that emerges from these accounts is the profound impact these systems have on everyday life, the things we often take for granted in a democracy. Yeah. Speaking our minds freely, accessing information without restrictions, choosing our own paths in life, those can become real struggles under authoritarian rule. It's a chilling reminder of how pervasive the control can be in an authoritarian system. It's not just about the big dramatic stuff like political imprisonment or censorship. It's about the constant subtle pressure to conform, to self-censor, to avoid anything that might attract unwanted attention.
Yeah, that's what really gets to me. It's like living under a microscope, always looking over your shoulder, never knowing who to trust. It must be exhausting.
It's incredibly draining, both emotionally and psychologically. Another recurring theme in these accounts is the impact on people's sense of agency and hope for the future. When you live in a system where you have no voice, no control over your own destiny, it can be incredibly demoralizing.
I can imagine. It's like being stuck in a rut with no way to climb out.
And that's why the stories of people who have transitioned from authoritarianism to democracy are so powerful. They often describe it as a kind of awakening, a rediscovery of their own voice and their ability to shape their own lives.
But I imagine it wasn't all easy sailing. There must have been challenges too, right?
Absolutely. Building a democracy is a long and complicated process, and it's not without its bumps along the way. There are often setbacks, disagreements about the best path forward, and a lot of trial and error involved. But the key difference is that in a democracy, those disagreements are allowed to play out in the open through debate, elections, and peaceful protests.
It's like learning to walk again after being in a cast for a long time. You're wobbly at first, but eventually you find your balance and start moving forward.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights the fact that democracy is a dynamic process. It's constantly evolving, adapting, and finding new ways to meet the challenges of the times.
So even though it can be messy and frustrating at times, it's ultimately about empowering people and giving them a voice in shaping their own future.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important aspect of this whole debate, the role of vested interests. Who benefits from each system, and what are their motivations for supporting it?
Okay, now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about who's pulling the strings behind the scenes. Our sources mention some pretty big players on the authoritarian side: North Korea, Russia, China.
Those are certainly prime examples of countries where power is concentrated in the hands of a select few. And it's fascinating to delve into their motivations and what they stand to gain from maintaining that grip on control.
All right, let's start with North Korea. It's like a black box to most of the world, super secretive, super isolated. What's the deal with them? Why are they so intent on maintaining this iron grip on their people?
Well, the Kim dynasty has ruled North Korea for decades with an iron fist, relying heavily on propaganda, repression, and a cult of personality to maintain power. They control every aspect of people's lives, from the information they consume to the jobs they hold.
It's like they're frozen in time, stuck in this Cold War mentality, while the rest of the world has moved on. But why? What are they so afraid of?
I think a big part of it is fear of losing control. They've built this elaborate system of power and privilege for themselves, and they're terrified of what might happen if they loosen their grip. They see any form of dissent as a threat to their very existence, so they go to extreme lengths to crush it.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about Russia? They're not exactly a hermit kingdom like North Korea. They engage with the rest of the world. They have the internet, yet Putin has been in power for what feels like forever. What's his game?
Putin's Russia is a complex case study in how an authoritarian leader can manipulate the levers of power to maintain control while still appearing to operate within a democratic framework. He's cracked down on independent media, silenced political opponents, and rigged elections to stay in power.
And let's not forget about those oligarchs, the super-rich elite who seem to be doing pretty well under Putin's rule. I guess when you're part of the inner circle, authoritarianism isn't so bad, huh?
It certainly raises questions about the distribution of wealth and power in an authoritarian system. Who benefits, and at what cost?
Okay, so we've got North Korea and Russia representing the authoritarian side of things. But let's talk about the big elephant in the room, China. They're a major player on the world stage these days, economically and politically. And they're definitely not shy about promoting their model of authoritarian capitalism as a viable alternative to democracy.
China's rise has been remarkable. There's no denying that. They've lifted millions of people out of poverty and become a global economic powerhouse. But their success has come at a price in terms of human rights, freedom of expression, and democratic values.
Yeah, and they're increasingly flexing their muscles on the world stage, challenging the U.S. for global dominance. It's just like we're heading for a new Cold War, but this time it's not just about ideology. It's about economic and technological power.
The U.S.-China rivalry is definitely one of the defining features of our current geopolitical landscape, and it raises some profound questions about the future of global order and the role of democracy in the 21st century.
Okay, so we've got these authoritarian heavy hitters on one side, North Korea, Russia, China, and on the other side, we've got, well, who exactly? The U.S. and its allies. Is that the best democracy has to offer?
It's not that simple. The world isn't neatly divided into two opposing camps. There are plenty of countries that fall somewhere in between, with hybrid systems that blend elements of both democracy and authoritarianism. And even within democracies, there's a wide range of variation in terms of how power is distributed, how rights are protected, and how citizens participate in the political process.
But it's not a black and white issue, more like a messy, complicated spectrum of political systems.
Exactly, and it's constantly evolving. What's considered democratic today might not be seen that way in the future.
Okay, my brain is officially fried. This is a lot to take in. Can we take a quick boba break before we delve into the personal stories?
Sounds good to me. Listener, we'll be back in a flash with some real-world perspectives on what it's like to live under these different systems. Don't go anywhere.
All right, we're back, ready to hear what it's actually like to live under these different systems.
Absolutely. These personal stories really hit home and show the human impact of these political choices.
This guy, Ilham Toki.
Okay.
He was a professor in China, a Uyghur, sent to life in prison a decade ago, just for suggesting that Uyghurs and Han Chinese should, talk things out peacefully.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Amnesty International's reports make it clear that he wasn't advocating for violence or anything.
Right.
He actually focused on building bridges between these different groups,
Yeah.
all while staying within the boundaries of Chinese law.
So what was the problem then?
Well, the Chinese government seems to have taken issue with his writings and lectures about the discrimination that Uyghurs face in Xinjiang.
Right.
Apparently, talking about that openly was a step too far.
Just for wanting people to get along.
And it's not just him.
Oh, okay.
There are reports from Amnesty International and even the UN's Human Rights Office
Wow.
that show this horrifying pattern in Xinjiang. They're talking about mass imprisonment, torture, persecution, all organized by the state.
Wow.
Targeting Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim groups.
Yeah, crimes against humanity, they're calling it.
Yeah, it's a very serious situation.
And then there's what they did to Toadi's daughter.
Yeah.
To her Ilham.
Yeah.
It just hit me hard.
The pressure they put on her is just unbelievable.
Really?
Reports say they dangle the possibility of her seeing her father again if she just shut up about his case.
Oh, man.
Imagine having to choose between speaking up for your dad and maybe ever seeing him again.
That's just cruel.
It is, and Jewer's own words really capture the pain of it all. She told Amnesty International, If I knew that would have been my last time communicating with my father, I would have called him for hours and hours and hours to tell him I love him. Unfortunately, many Uyghur people, many Uyghur daughters and sons share the same fate as me.
Oh, man.
It's heartbreaking.
This silencing of victims, it's like a tactic. You know, when we were talking about China's social credit system earlier, it reminded me of this documentary I saw about how people there are using technology to monitor each other. Like neighbors reporting on neighbors for minor infractions.
Wow.
It's wild.
That's a great example of how technology can be used to amplify the control mechanisms of an authoritarian regime.
Yeah.
And it highlights the chilling effect this can have on social trust and community cohesion. When you can't even trust your neighbors, it creates a climate of fear and suspicion that's incredibly damaging.
And it makes you realize that the impact of authoritarianism goes way beyond just the laws and regulations. It seeps into every aspect of life, shaping how people interact with each other, how they raise their children, even how they think and feel. Let's unpack this totalitarianism thing.
Okay.
What are we really talking about here?
So think of it like this: the state in a totalitarian system wants to be the puppet master for the entire society, controlling everything people do and even think.
No freedom at all.
Pretty much. And there are these 6 classic signs of a totalitarian regime that these political scientists, Carl Friedrich, Zbigniew Brzezinski, came up with.
All right, lay it on me.
All right.
What are the 6 signs?
So first, you've got this all-encompassing ideology,
Yeah.
like a set of beliefs the state uses to try and shape everything about people's lives.
Sounds intense. What else?
Second, you only have one party running the show, usually led by a dictator.
Ah, so no messy elections.
And then number 3, they use state terror. That means they use violence and fear to keep everyone in line and shut down anyone who disagrees.
So it's not just about having a strong army.
Right.
It's about scaring people into submission.
Exactly.
What are the last 3?
Well, number 4 is a monopoly on weapons. Only the state gets to have guns and other weapons.
Makes sense. Got to keep the power all to themselves.
Right.
Okay, what else?
Number 5 is they control all communication. Think media, internet, the whole shebang. They control what people see, hear, and even talk about.
So they get to write their own version of reality. That's powerful.
It is.
And kind of terrifying. Okay, last one. Hit me with it.
Last but not least, they control the economy.
Okay.
The state calls the shots on production, distribution, the whole 9 yards.
So it's like a giant spider web with the state at the center controlling every single thread.
Exactly.
Total political, social, and economic domination.
Yes.
And here's the scary part.
Uh-oh.
This isn't just ancient history.
Right.
We're seeing this kind of authoritarianism creeping up all over the world.
Yeah, you're right. But it also raises a question.
What's that?
Is adaptability a strength or a weakness in the face of oppression? Does it ultimately help to dismantle the system or simply allow individuals to survive within it?
Whoa, that's a deep question. And I'm not sure I have an easy answer for that.
That's okay. These are complex issues with no easy answers.
That's for sure.
But by having these difficult conversations and grappling with these questions, we're taking a step in the right direction.
I agree. It's about staying engaged, staying curious, and never losing sight of the importance of human rights and democratic values.
And that's why it's so important to hear from people who have lived through these experiences. They can give us a glimpse into the human cost of these systems and help us understand the stakes involved.
So let's dive into those personal stories. What are some of the key takeaways from the accounts we have in our sources?
One of the most common themes is the feeling of being trapped, of having your choices and opportunities limited by a system that doesn't value individual freedom.
You know, it's interesting you should say that. I was talking to a friend of mine who recently emigrated from a country with a pretty repressive regime. And she was saying how she never realized how much she had internalized those limitations until she moved here. She said it was like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders.
Wow.
And she could finally breathe freely and pursue her dreams without fear.
That's a powerful testament to the transformative power of freedom. And it underscores the point that sometimes we don't even realize how much our environment is shaping our thoughts and behaviors until we're exposed to something different.
It's like that saying, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. But in this case, it's you don't know what you're missing till you experience it.
Exactly. And that's why these personal stories are so valuable. They give us a visceral understanding of what's at stake in this debate between authoritarianism and democracy. It's not just an abstract philosophical argument. It's about real people's lives, their hopes, their dreams, their fears.
So it's not just about individual freedom. It's about the collective potential that's unleashed when people are empowered to participate in their own governance.
Precisely. And that's why democracy, for all its flaws and challenges, remains the best system we've come up with for ensuring human dignity, progress, and well-being.
Okay, that was a lot to process. I feel like we've covered so much ground today, from defining these systems to exploring their real-world impacts on people's lives.
It's been a truly insightful deep dive, and I hope our listener feels the same way.
Me too. And remember, folks, this conversation doesn't end here. Keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep those deep dive requests coming.
And if you're looking for a little escape from the world of politics, might I suggest checking out the Micky YouTube channel. They've got some amazing travel and cocktail content that's guaranteed to lift your spirits.
Great idea. Until next time, keep sipping, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.